Good day, everybody, and welcome to a short presentation on the progress of a soul. My name is Dr. Sebastian Mahfood. I am an adjunct faculty member at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. I am the president of En Route Books and Media, and I am the producer at WCAT Radio. I'm going to share my screen, and you should be able to see the first slide of the presentation entitled The Soul's Progress, an exploration of Canto XXV of Dante Alighieri's Purgatorio. The translation from which I'll be reading was made by Daniel Fitzpatrick, begun in March of 2020 and completed in March of 2021. So in commemoration of the 700th anniversary of the death of Dante Alighieri. With him on the project is Timothy Smalls, who is the first sculptor in history to sculpt all 100 of the cantos of the Divine Comedy. So working together as a team, they produced something that you can find at www.helpdantehelpitaly.com, a complete and illustrated translation in commemoration of the 700th anniversary of Dante Alighieri's death. Dante, as he's climbing up Mount Purgatory, which you see here, meets with 7 angels. In each of those angels has a particular nature. The angel of humility, the angel of caritas, the angel of meekness, the angel of zeal, the angel of liberality, the angel of abstinence, and the angel of chastity. Now, Dante, when he passes through Peter's Gate, gets 7 P's marked on his forehead. And as he's moving through each ledge, one of the angels, one of these angels I've mentioned, brushes his forehead with its wing and erases one of the P's. So every time he loses a P, he becomes lighter and more easily able to move up the mountain. So it's on the ledge of the gluttons that he meets up with Statius. And Statius has just been released from the ledge of the avaricious, which is a ledge just below. Well, when he catches up with the poets, they include him in their number, and the 3 of them start moving up the mountain together. Dante starts asking questions. Well, he's been asking questions this whole time, but he asks a particular one on the ledge of the gluttons. So we'll move to that slide. He sees, and you can see here on the right, Timothy Smalls' illustrations. On the right bottom, he sees gluttons, souls that look emaciated. And he closes a parenthesis on a question that he had asked 53 cantos earlier in Canto 6 of the Inferno, when he was walking through the circle of the gluttons. So we've got bookends here. The circle of gluttons, circle 3 in the Inferno, and the cornice of gluttons, the 6th level up the mountain in the Purgatorio. So in the Inferno, he asked a question. He asked about the resurrection. And he says, will these souls, when they come back, when they retrieve their bodies, will their pain be worse? And Virgil refers him to Aristotle and says, well, you know what the great thinker said, the great philosopher, said that the more something is perfect, the more perfect is its pleasure or its pain. So indeed, when these souls get their bodies back, they will be more perfect, because the definition of the human person philosophically is that we're hylomorphic. That is, we are both spiritual and material beings. We'll talk a little bit later about what that means and what the implication of that is when we talk about the resurrection of the body. He stops short and doesn't ask the next question that would naturally follow that first question. And that next question is, wait a second, these are incorporeal souls. How can they possibly look like they're experiencing pain or discomfort? And he asked that question of these souls down at the bottom, who are running around that ledge, that cornice of the gluttons on Mount Purgatory. And Statius has an explanation for him. So we'll begin with the text where he asks, how can one be lean there where the need of nourishment can't reach? Okay, Statius explains. When Lachesis holds no further thread, now Lachesis is the middle fate of the three fates. She's the one that measures the thread and decides when to cut it. That thread is the thread of our lives. The soul absolves itself of the flesh. So Lachesis has cut our life line, and the soul leaves the flesh. So where does it go? It bears within itself virtues, both human and divine. And again, that hylomorphism. The other potencies, also much muted, memory, intelligence, and will, remain in many acts much sharper than at first. So the soul still remembers. It can still act. And that's what we see these souls here doing in Mount Purgatory. They are engaged in an act of the will to complete their purification so that they can move or progress on toward heaven. Now, when they get to heaven, they're going to be in the same boat. That is, they're still incorporeal souls. They're disembodied. And therefore, they are not in a natural condition. The natural condition of the human person is material and spiritual. Now, that's important because it presumes the general resurrection of all of us. I'll continue. Without a moment's rest, of itself the same soul falls miraculously to one of the shores. So as soon as it leaves the body, it will go either to the Tiber, where it will wait for the angel boatman to carry it across the sea to the shore of Mount Purgatory, where it will begin its ascent to God, or to Acheron, which is the river of the dead. And it's the place where souls wait for the boatman to come and pick them up and carry them across to their eternal torment. Now, in both cases, the souls are restless to get to their final resting place. So in life, if you were a glutton, that's what you chose. That's what your free will decided that you wanted to do. And because you embraced it, that's what you get for all eternity, because you embrace the creation and not the creator. However, some gluttons are able to see through the creation to its creator, and they decide that they're going to accept, out of their own free will, the grace that God freely provides. So that's the one of the two rivers. That's where they end up. So as soon as space circumscribes it there, so as soon as they show up at one of those two shores, the formative power ranges all around and thus gives quality to its living members. Now that formative power is the soul. The soul is the form of the body. Well, because the soul does one thing, it's got one job, it forms a body. It's going to form another body out of the dust in the air. And as the air, when saturated by the rain, becomes adorned of diverse colors by another's rays, it simply reflects. So the air near here is set in that form that remains and seals the soul in its power. And similarly, then, to the little flare that follows the fire there wherever it moves, its new form follows the spirit. So that which sense has appeared here is called a shade, and therefore comes each organ needed to sense, even for sight. So the souls can see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. They've got all five senses in these new bodies they formed out of the dust of the air. They're still not resurrected. They're just walking around as shades. Thus we speak and thus we smile. Thus we fashion the tears and the sighs you might have heard of the mountain. According to how we're afflicted with desire or the other affections, the shade is shaped. And this is the cause of that which made you marvel. So ultimately what Dante is seeing when he looks and sees these gluttons in Mount Purgatory, he's seeing the spiritual reality that characterizes the soul. This is what their spirits look like, and therefore that's what their bodies form. These souls bear the marks of their spiritual state. And that's precisely why they're on this mountain, because in being filled with virtue, the virtue that corresponds to the vice they pursued, they are able to come to the fullness of who they were designed to be. Now, we're still not anywhere near the physical general resurrection. We're just seeing what the spiritual state of these souls looks like. So the second part, the nature of the soul. Now let's talk about that formative principle, what it is that Dante has seen when he asked his question. How can these souls, if they're incorporeal beings, look like they're actually hungry? The fuller response to that question is to explain the nature of the soul. So Statius explains how a soul even gets, how we get a soul, and how that soul gets from one point to another. He's talking about generation, and he's talking about how human parents form the body and how God directly creates the soul. So Statius explains, perfect blood, which isn't drunk by the thirsty veins, and remains as that food that's taken from the table, bears from the heart to all man's members formative power, as that which flows through the veins to make them. Once more digested, it descends to where it's better to be silent than to speak. So perfect blood goes to the loins. And after that, it's born on another's blood into the natural vessel. So through an act of sexual intercourse, a man sends his perfect blood into a woman. There, the one and the other are blended. The one disposed to receive, that's the woman, and the other to give, that's the man, by the perfect place from which it's pressed. In joined to it, it begins to operate, coagulating first, and then enlivening that which it's made to consist for its matter. This is a medieval explanation of how life begins. And, you know, when the sperm meets the egg, a human body starts to form. Well, we understand that's at that moment that the human soul is created by God and placed within the body. And so Catholics believe that conception is the moment in which God creates the soul. So the human person exists from the moment of conception. And the human person, remember, is hylomorphic. It's a body and a soul together. That's not exactly the understanding that Dante has, because he's drawing from St. Thomas, who drew from Aristotle. And so they have a different idea. Aristotle believed, for instance, that the man's soul was quickened or placed in the body by God at about age 45 days, when the brain started to function. But that the woman's soul wasn't placed into the body until about 90 days. Having fashioned a soul, the active power, like a plant's, differing as much as that which is on the way differs from that already ashore, then functions thus, that now it moves and senses as a sponge in the sea, and then it proceeds to organize the powers to which it gives rise. So the soul begins vegetatively, that is, it is a vegetative soul, or the soul is simply causing the body to grow. It doesn't yet have the faculties of the human, which will come. Now it unfolds, my son, now is displayed the power that proceeds from the generative heart, where nature attends to all members, but how from animal it's made infant you do not yet see. This is such a point as has made a man more sage than you err, so that in his doctrine the soul is disjoined from the possible intellect, because he could not see its proper organ. So he's getting to his point, and he's going to explain it in what I've colored green here in a second. Open your breast to the truth that comes, and know that as soon as the articulation of the brain's perfected in the embryo, the prime mover turns to it, elated over nature's art, and breathes a new spirit, replete with power, which then takes up into its substance that which it finds there, active, and fashions one soul alone that lives and senses and turns back upon itself. So you can see the progress. The human person starts out as vegetative, just simply growing, and then becomes sensitive. That is, it can express itself through those five senses. And then ultimately becomes rational. That is, it can, once it perceives something through its senses, convert that perception into a universal concept. And this is why you really only need to touch something that's really hot once to understand the nature of hotness. And so the next time you see something that's hot like fire, you won't touch it because you've got the concept. That thing is fire, and it will burn you. So those were Aristotle's three developments of a soul. Now, so every plant has a soul. Remember, the soul is the animating principle. Every animal has a soul, but only humans have a rational soul. And that rational soul is what the vegetative and sensitive souls are conformed to, because the highest faculty is that which governs all faculties beneath it. So for what St. Thomas says on this point, he says that since the intellectual soul has an operation independent of the body, it is subsistent. Therefore, to be and to be made are proper to it. Moreover, since it is an immaterial substance, it cannot be caused through generation, but only through creation by God. Therefore, to hold that the intellectual soul is caused by the begetter is nothing else than to hold the soul to be non-subsistent, and consequently to perish with the body. So, in the words of St. Thomas, the parents generate the body, but God generates the rational soul directly. And that rational soul is that which is created in the image and likeness of God and is able to, therefore, enter into eternal and joyful communion with God. Or not. You can choose. It's got free will. It can choose to spend its eternity outside of the sweetness and light of its creator. So Statius has given us a fine explanation of how the soul comes into being and how it progresses on its way back home to God. So the last piece is a spiritual body. And this is what we started with, that the soul, which is an incorporeal substance, gets resurrected. So now we are at the point at which Dante has explained, through Statius, the progress of the soul, how the soul looks like it can feel hunger, and where it's headed after it leaves the body, either in a state of grace, in which case it is able to experience the joyful and eternal communion with its creator, or in a state of sin, in which it remains for all eternity stunted and in pain. So this brings us to our last part. What is a spiritual body and how it gets resurrected? Now we know from our philosophical anthropology that we are hylomorphic. So we've talked about that, which means that we are both body and soul. We are a material and a spiritual reality. So for a human person to die and the soul leaves the body is not the fullness of hylomorphism. That is, you would have an incorporeal soul without a home, without a body. So philosophically, we can demonstrate that if the human person is going to be a human person going forward, then it needs to have the body. So a spiritual body gets resurrected. So in the Paradiso, Dante explains this in Canto 7 through the mouth of Beatrice. She says, "You say, I see the water, I see the fire, the air, and the earth, and all their admixture come to corruption and endure but a bit. And these things still were creatures, such that if that which is said should be true, they ought to be secure against corruption. The angels, brother, and the clean place here where you are may be called created, just as they are in their entire being. But the elements that you have named and these things which are made of them are informed of a created power. The matter they have in them was created. Created was the formative power in these stars that turn about them. The soul of every brute and of the plants is drawn of potency's complexion by the ray and the motion of the sacred lights. But the supreme bounty breathes your life unmediated, and he enamors it of himself, so that it then desires him always. And thus you may yet argue your resurrection, if you think again how the human flesh once was made in forming the first pair of parents." So God created a human person out of dirt, out of clay, and breathed into it life, and that was Adam. And then from Adam, he took a rib and created woman and breathed into woman life. So God's directly creating the souls that animate these bodies. And therefore, we can presume that when we die, our souls will remain, because they were directly created by God, for all eternity, either in a state of pleasure or in a state of pain. And what we want for all eternity is spiritual growth that the joyful and eternal communion with our Creator provides or will bring. Christ, who is capital grace, who is the fullness of truth, these gifts of grace that Christ gives to us freely, are meant for our salvation, because we are created in the image and the likeness of our Father in heaven. We are literally walking through a storm of mercy that is raining down upon our heads at all times. And most of us prefer to carry umbrellas because we got to be me. Because the mercy of God, we are afraid, will get in the way of our pleasure and our pride. But eternal growth is a different kind of measure. That is, it's one in which we freely give our free will back to God so that we may grow spiritually forever in communion with Him. Now, as human persons, as beings who are both matter and spirit, we know we're going to get our bodies back. And so what do we do with that? When Dante's in heaven, he sees St. John, and he's peering into St. John's soul to see if he can see St. John's body, because he believed, like a lot of other medievals, that the words of Christ, if I want this guy to stay alive until I get back, what's that any business of yours, he says to the other apostles. And so a myth grew that he would never die. And so Dante believed that he could peer in and see his body, but Dante self-contradicts that when St. John explains, or when he has St. John explain, why do you blind yourself to see what has no place here? In the earth, my body is earth. And it will be there thus with the others until our number is equal to the eternal purpose. That is, until it's time for the general resurrection. With the two stalls in the blessed cloister are the two lights alone who've ascended. He's talking about Jesus and Mary as the only physical bodies up in heaven. And bear this back into your world. So we know that heaven is a place, but more than a place, St. John Paul II says, it's a state of being. We know it's a place because there are two human bodies physically in heaven, fully resurrected, Jesus and Mary. And when the day comes that the general resurrection occurs, and all of the souls in heaven are delighted to find that they've been reunited with their bodies, we will have a new heaven and a new earth, a place where these souls will be able to flourish and continue to grow spiritually and physically. Their bodies will never grow old. They'll never get sick. They'll never die. This is the case for the souls who die in a state of grace. For the souls who die in a state of sin, the opposite, eternal torment, that is greater than the torment they're currently experiencing, is in store for them, based on what Virgil says way back in Canto VI of the Inferno. Lastly, we have a quote from the Summa. St. Thomas says, "The soul cannot have the final perfection of the human species, so long as it is separated from the body. Hence, no soul will remain forever separated from the body. Therefore, it is necessary for all, as well as for one, to rise again." And there you have it. Dante adequately explains the nature of the soul, its progress, and its final end. I encourage everyone who sees this presentation to pursue this Lenten season their eternal and joyful communion with God, our Father. Thank you for spending this time with me. For more, please visit helpdantehelpitaly.com. I'm Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.